Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome into the Comics Lair for Across the Rooftops with Daredevil, our look at Marvel Comics' horn-headed hero. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. We'll start by having the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little about their particular interest in comics and in Daredevil. And we'll start with Dan.
Hi, my name is Dan Jolley, and I've been writing comics and novels and video games in various orders for a long time now. I got started in 1990. The first part of my career was mainly writing for Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. I probably am best known in those circles for co-creating the Jason Rush incarnation of the DC character Firestorm.
And Daredevil?
Marvel was my introduction to comics, really. Daredevil was one of the very first that I encountered. And, comics more than anything else broadened my horizons. I mean, I started reading comics as soon as I learned to read. And, like Iron Man, he's like a knight in armor, but he can fly. And Daredevil was right there. It was like, so he's a guy who can't see, and yet he's better at basically everything than anybody that I know who can see. He was an integral part of the of what became my whole universe.
Okay. Mike?
Hi, Mike Davenport. I actually started reading comics back in '82. Started out with the X-Men. I really related to them initially, and then from there moved on to Spider-Man, and Daredevil was the first introduction to the really back alley, gritty comic book style. My first introduction to the style of noir in comics. So, Marvel was always my number one pick, and been a fan ever since. I am currently the creative director of the Marvel Universe Online project, a redesign of Earth 616 for a video game pitch project. So that's what I work on from day to day. And I'm just happy to be here.
Okay. David?
My name is David Taylor II. I've been reading comic books since I was 4 years old. My father introduced me to them. And so that's why they're precious to me for memory's sake, but also it's how I learned words. Daredevil is the peak and pinnacle Marvel hero for the Marvel brand. Everything about him is kind of the core of what Lee and Kirby and Ditko all had in mind when they created their heroes. That's why he's been around so long. That's why he's so popular, because he has the unique ability to tie two worlds together, the fantasy world and the real world we live in. And so I'm fascinated by that in general. And people in my author circles, because I travel in more than one circle, people in my author circles know me for my Realm series, Lucifer, Soldier, Serpents, and Sin. I have a whole story world I've created about how the war in heaven got started and how people got involved. And but I've been reading and writing since I was like 7 in terms of creating content. So I'm just happy to be able to do it for a living, trying to do more.
Bobby?
I am Bobby Nash. I am a writer. I write comics, novels, the other things in that that strike my fancy. I've been a comic fan since I was a kid. It was Spider-Man that kind of got me started. So growing up, I read things like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and some of the space comics were really a big thing. But when I was 12, we moved, and the first people that I met, the first guys I met in my new school on my first day, were during our study hall. We're trading comics with each other back and forth. And I knew this small section of comics, and I was I was suddenly introduced to things like the X-Men or, Daredevil. And Daredevil I hit it at the right time because that was when he's fighting ninjas. There's sword fights. It's like the movies you enjoyed watching on Saturday afternoon in the pages of a comic. And he kind of reminded me of Spider-Man a bit because he was that still a street level hero, even though all this other stuff's going on. And so I was hooked instantly and have been a Daredevil fan ever since.
Okay. Darin?
I'm a comic reader from way back. I think some of my earliest comics were an issue of World's Finest that had Black Canary and Green Arrow, and I can still close my eyes and picture what that looked like when I was 7. I had a Micronauts #1 when I was 19, for 1979 when I was 8. But I can still remember the first X-Men and the first Daredevil I purchased, and basically where I was in the mountains on a vacation with mom and dad. And my first X-Men was 137, The Death of Phoenix, during the Chris Claremont, John Byrne, Austin run. And if that doesn't get you hooked on X-Men, you have no soul. And then I was at the Quick Check on US 52 in Midway, North Carolina, when I bought the first issue of Daredevil ever I bought, which was 181, The Death of Elektra. If that doesn't get you hooked on Daredevil, again, you have no soul and no taste in comics, because that was Frank Miller at the height of awesome in Daredevil. As far as group heroes, it's always been X-Men. And as far as solo heroes for me, it's always been Daredevil. I've got my Daredevil statue upstairs. I may drag it down after a while. Haven't decided yet. And at one point in about 2003, before I finally I got sent to Iraq for a year, and that kind of canceled my comic collecting career. But at one point I was only missing about 18 issues of Daredevil. I had made it my mission to collect the whole series, and I've still got them all upstairs and love them all, read them all. So I'm ready to talk.
All right.
So now, was your third comic, were you disappointed when a major character wasn't killed in the third comic you read?
Actually, I think the third big comic I got was Batman right around the time that the Joker beat Jason Todd to death.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, that might be correct.
Well, I actually came to Daredevil by a more roundabout route because I had a very limited allowance, and I spent most of it on Superman and Batman and Legion of Superheroes. But I did get the reprint of Daredevil's origin with the red and yellow suit, and I thought, boy, it's really cool. This guy's a lawyer, and he's blind, and he's across the rooftops, and he's fighting crime. That's really great. But, my allowance goes to Superman. So that's kind of where I was till I was in high school. And I read a Marvel Treasury edition that had a Black Widow story in it. And that was about the time when women my age were deciding, well, we're going to be women, we're going to be girls, what terminology are we going to use, where do we fit? And in this anthology, there was a story where Black Widow came out of a helicopter and landed on a rooftop with a bunch of guys who I think were Hydra. And one of them said into his radio, "Oh, it's nothing to worry about, it's only a woman." And she clocked him in the throat with her bladed hand and said, "There's nothing only about being a woman." And I thought, oh, I like her. But, she wasn't a regular in any comics at that time. And some years later, I walked into my comic shop, and there she was in Daredevil. And I thought, this is that cool guy, and here she is. So I started reading it and stayed with it through the Frank Miller run, which is one of my favorites. And we'll talk about everybody's favorites in a little bit. And some after that. And then I kind of drifted away from it, drifted in and out of things, and picked it up with this current run, which is, I just think Daredevil is really cool. So we're going to talk about the comic book, and then we'll talk about the movies and TV, and it's all right if things cross up. So starting there, what do you like the most about Daredevil? Darin, you want to start us?
Like I said, I started during the Frank Miller era, but then I also read it all through the John Romita Jr. and Ascenti stuff back in the day. Read the Kevin Smith stuff. I've always just liked Matt. Matt is a good person, but he does not do good things. And I think the fact that he definitely puts the devil in Daredevil, because he means well, but he is not, it's not, I'm going to be nice to you. I mean, when Matt Murdock goes out in the streets to fight crime. He's not there to pull his punches, which is one of the things that I think we were talking about the other day about the new Daredevil run, where they're talking about Matt Murdock uses all of his senses to pull his punches. I was like, I used to read Matt Murdock during the day. He probably could and chose not to. And I don't know. I've always just kind of liked the straight ahead Matt Murdock Daredevil character. And I love Ben Urich.
Anybody else want to pick up on that?
I don't know. It's for me. I mean, I think becoming Daredevil for him was a way for him to take all of that baggage of his upbringing and focus it into the only thing that he knew how, in the only way he knew how. You know, he's got this power, his ability now. He has, you know, his upbringing that molded him to this rigid doctrine of right and wrong. And now he's got this ability to go out there and exercise that. And plus he's as an adult now, he realizes that, you know, some of the things that he was exposed to as a child kind of messed him up. So that's why he sets those limitations for himself when he's out there, you know, that he really doesn't want to kill, you know, but he really feels like, you know, justice needs to be served, you know, in the only way that he knows how. And that's for me, that separates him. Like we all know, that's where that line ends for him, and where guys like Punisher pick up, you know.
Right. And he's probably changed a lot more than a lot of other, you know, characters that headline their own title, because in the early days he kind of had that Spider-Man jokey sensibility to him that over time, and you know, the creators of the Daredevil comic have put this character through the ringer.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Matt Murdock has not had an easy life. And so the fact that he can still get out, he still goes out to do what he does, even though he knows it's almost certainly going to find a way to bite him in the butt later. You know, he still gets out there and does that, and is still fighting especially fighting for the people that live in Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah.
He has, it's not, you know, he's not just, I'm out to save the world. It's like, he has that focus.
Well,
Right.
Daredevil for me is one of the few characters where I like absolutely everything about his world. That's rare that happens, at least for me. But I love his costume. I love his powers. I love the visceral nature of what it must be like to have lost one sense and the other ones get amped up so high, so you have to live differently from other people. His path is similar to Batman's, but he doesn't have the wealth, so he has to do it himself. But all of his supporting characters, I love Karen, I love the Punisher, I love Foggy, I love Elektra. Loved Elektra from panel one. I love the Jester, even though he's goofy. And the whole thing with Kingpin, see, Daredevil's one of those characters where you only have to suspend your disbelief for the powers.
Yeah.
Everything else about his world is pretty much real. The mafia, the gangs, the fighting, all that is exceptional, because we know that, you know, Gotham is heightened reality. Gotham is always comic booky.
Yeah.
But Daredevil's in a real city with real issues, with real cops, real criminals, real mob bosses, real everything.
Is there another example in comics where the Kingpin started out as a Spider-Man villain, but if you ask anybody now, he is a Daredevil villain through and through. I don't know if there's another example of where someone took someone's, it's like, that's not your villain.
There is Sabretooth.
Yeah, because he was an Iron Fist villain.
He was an Iron Fist villain.
He was an Iron Fist villain, exactly.
Well, and Deathstroke started out as a Titan/Dick Grayson villain, and he's been morphed into a Batman villain, much to the great dismay of many Titans fans. Dan, did you want to add anything?
Well, it's like as the character has evolved, it seems like what started out as his radar sense has gotten tamped down and tamped down and tamped down.
It has.
And now in the TV series, he doesn't even have it at all.
Yeah.
Which it causes me dismay, because when I first started reading the character, I hadn't ever considered a human having like built-in radar like that. And I remember, I think it was in the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which I collected as avidly as any other series, and
Still
memor-
have mine.
Still got mine.
memorizing everybody's real name and origin and powers and all that stuff. And I think that there were diagrams in there explaining, like, visually how the radar sense worked.
Yes, his
and-
brain sees in 360 degrees.
Yeah, and he could literally sense what was around a corner.
Yes.
And that blew my little 6-year-old mind. Reading comics, I thought that's one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. That, as long as he's awake, it would be really difficult to surprise the guy.
Yeah. In one issue, I think it was of Wolverine. Wolverine goes crazy and he's killing a bunch of heroes, and he says the only person that he feels is difficult to sneak up on is Daredevil. He literally can hear a butterfly's wings flapping in another room.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
now
when-
the problem that you're talking about is common, and that is that when you've got decades-long heroes, and when you've got so many different production teams kind of adding their 2 cents, then we're going to get into the murky powers discussion, which we have all the time.
Yeah.
And I have to agree with Dan that the whole idea of his radar sense not being the part and parcel and core of how he does what he does is ridiculous to me, because that's the birth of the character along with his father. And so we've talked about it many times on Twitter. You start tweaking too many core elements, it's not the character anymore. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. And we're jumping ahead a little bit. That's my biggest problem with the TV show.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm watching Matt fight, and I'm waiting because I'm one of the few people that really liked the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. I didn't like everything about it, but I really, really liked it because it's so visceral, and the way he uses that sonar, and the way he sees the sonar waves, and the way he has to sleep in a sleep deprivation tank. That's so unique, so unique. And so to get rid of that is senseless to me. And so I'm watching the show, the Netflix show, and Matt has to hit you like 20 times. I'm like, wait just a minute. Okay, he doesn't just hit. That means those hits aren't registering. That doesn't mean anything. And that goes against his idea of his training. And he should know how and where to hit you. He can hear your heartbeat. He can hit you in the sternum, right in the breastbone, better than anybody else. He can be accurate with that. So I didn't, so he's just been dialed down so much until it's kind of Daredevil light. So,
but Marco Cicchetto draws that radar sense like topographical drawing.
Yes.
I was gonna,
And Bobby, you want to speak to that?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that was probably one of the best places I've seen that is in that run that where they started over. There was a new series. Mark Waid, I think, was writing it, and the artists were doing where you would see things from Matt's radar point of view, and everything was like a topographical map. But they would do things in it, like if there's a bird flying through, they would do things in the art to show the bird's passage disrupting what's normally there. And the artist just did a beautiful job of making that work in the comic page.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Well, I don't ever think there's anything wrong with exploring different aspects of a character, but just like if you stretch a rubber band too far, it starts to fray. That's the same thing that happens when you push the limits of the origin of the character so far until it starts to fray. It's not them anymore. And so the challenge is to be creative and fresh given the parameters that you have. And Daredevil's world is so broad and so real. That's why I think we get great story after great story after great story. So that part I like. I just don't like dumbing Matt down to make that happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite of what happened with, I'm sorry, Nancy.
No, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
It was kind of the opposite of what happened with Superman, because when Superman debuted, he was really fast and could jump really high and was really strong. And then every time he was introduced into a new medium, the creators felt they had to add a power. So he goes from comic books to the comic strips, and suddenly he's got X-ray vision, and then goes to a radio show, and then he's got super hearing.
And now he can fly.
Then gets into the cartoon, and now he can fly. And I probably got those out of order. but you know, the feature creep with the character kept on and kept on and kept on until he turned into a demigod, and then it became less and less realistic to write stories where he had anything like realistic weaknesses or villains, and you know, then you end up having to add kryptonite.
At which point did he get the cellophane S that he can throw it back?
That's in the movie. That's the movie.
The Donner S.
Aha.
But you know, picking up on what David was saying about when you change this and you change that and you change the other thing and you change something else, it's kind of like the Vision says to the fake Vision at the end of WandaVision. You know, if you keep changing the planks in the ship, at what point is it no longer the ship and something else altogether different? And that happens to comics characters a lot.
Especially when they jump mediums.
Yeah.
Especially when they jump mediums.
And I would like to add, it seems that seems to be more concentrated with comics characters. Anybody want to chime in on that? Why is it that this particular genre seems to either lend itself or the production teams feel like they can take the most extreme liberties? Because when they did Harry Potter, they went and got a boy that looked like Harry Potter walked off the book. That's how they found Radcliffe. That's how they say they found it.
The whole series is literally exactly the books. It seems like they spared no expense to make sure that every scene in those movies were pulled straight from the book. And you're right, they seem to have a problem with doing that for comic books.
Right. But though, I think part of it is because we have rotating creative teams and each creative team puts their spin on things.
Yeah.
Like Darin mentioned the Ann Nocenti, John Romita Jr. run, which is very sci-fi and
Mephisto
horror based. Yeah. Whereas the Daredevil, the Frank Miller version is very
ninjas.
Yeah, ninjas, right.
And then you go to the Brian Bendis run, which is more crime drama.
Street Gully, yeah.
So when you come into these things, and like if we say, okay, we're going to make a Daredevil movie, everybody has their own idea of what Daredevil is, and most of the time it's either their favorite run or it's how that character was when they started reading. And so it is tough. I mean, the fact that the MCU has managed to make movies that have somehow been successful without people, freaking out a lot because they're just cherry picking the parts they want.
Yeah.
And but I think that's what it is over Daredevil's been published 60 years or so.
1964 to present. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of comics.
No, well, okay, but the reason the MCU is successful, besides the timing is a huge part of their success. The reason they're successful is because they kept the core.
Yes.
In most cases, there are some where they don't, but
how many incarnations of Iron Man you've seen? Downey Jr. nails the essence of. But Tony Stark was real. He'd be that. That's what I mean.
He would be that later, but the original Iron Man was not that flamboyant a character. He was a very uptight, staid businessman who, would go out and fight crime because he had no choice because he had the thing to save his life. But he wasn't this wisecracking, womanizing as much as he is in the movies. They picked the part that they liked the best.
It's the best. They have to concentrate it all into. They have to take as much of the lore and concentrate it into a cohesive story that ties everything that everyone's brief recollection of those characters over the history and put it into one hour and 30-minute movie, so that everyone feels like a piece of it is something that they can connect with, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Right, because like if you look at
something.
Oh, I was just going to say my theory on the original of this thread is that it's taken us a good 30, 40 years to go from sort of like 1989. Well, we'll start with Christopher Reeve, but I mean, they did Superman pretty straight. They said Batman, but we have to sort of make it horror-esque. And so we'll let them do that way. And then when the X-Men come along, they don't even let them be in their own costumes. They just dress them all in black leather because that no one wants to see people. But we've gone into space from Christopher Reeve, 1978, to we literally just had Starro on people's faces in the theater last month.
That's crazy.
And we have, Polka Dot Man in the Polka Dot Man costume. So I think that we've really come a long way. I just think that there were decades where they were like, if we make it too comic booky, nobody will go see it. Then all of a sudden we had a talking raccoon walking around with a talking tree. And they said, oh my God, we can do whatever we want and they will love it. And that's why we get Suicide Squad. That's Darin's theory, is they finally realized, oh, comic books have been around for so many years because people actually like that and we can make the movies look like that. That's my theory.
I think also too, you're starting to get people in positions of power to make these movies and TV shows who grew up on this stuff. Whereas before it was non-creative people making decisions that they were building the box that the creative people had to work in. It reminds me of the story that I've heard when they were trying to make the first Spider-Man movie, where they're in this meeting with all these people and Sam Raimi's giving the pitch and all this. And this one executive goes, it sounds great. I just have one question. Does it have to be spiders? Kids are afraid of spiders. So kids are not going to go watch this movie, at which point they had to turn around and go, really? Kids are going to be afraid of Spider-Man? Because this was a guy who he didn't know any of this stuff. It was just the business side to him.
Yeah. Dan, did you want to add something?
Well, part of the reason why, and this is speculation on my part, I don't know any facts about it. It would make sense. The Marvel Netflix shows clearly were way lower budget than the Marvel movies.
Yes.
Way lower budget. You get the Marvel movies, you get all the hundreds of millions of dollars. Let's make the spectacle as spectacular as possible. But I was working on a video game at one point, and they said, okay, Dan, what you got for the final cut scene? And I said, okay, this is what I've got. It's described this huge scene involved a whole city. And the animation director was like, sounds expensive. and I can totally see in the pitch meeting for Daredevil, they're like, oh, he's this great guy. He's a martial artist and he's blind, but all his other senses are super enhanced. And he's got this amazing radar sense, and it renders the world like a topographical map. And some line producers in the meeting going, that radar sense sounds expensive. That may have been why his powers got reduced for the TV show. Just realities of TV production.
I want to respond to what Bobby said right quick, and that is that I definitely agree that the Iron Man we met had a lot of Downey flourishes, and I think that's what endeared him, because Downey himself is so charming. But I also think from a writer's point of view, you have to give him that to give Tony an arc. Tony has to go from something to something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so he makes a clear break from being careless about life, his life, the lives he's affecting. I'm just trying to, hook up with as many calendar models as I can, being flippant, almost the foppish Bruce Wayne persona that Bruce pretends to have, to all of a sudden getting a real conscious about how he's impacting the world. And that's his whole thing.
Sure.
And so I think it's what Mike said, that it's the distillation of 40, 50, 60, 80 years in Superman's case, Batman's case. And Superman was, the Chris Reeve Superman is another good example of what you were saying, because original Superman was not like that at all. He was rough and tumble. He was beating up wife beaters. He was going against America's enemies. He did a lot that was just really rough if you look at his early comics. So that Chris Reeve Superman is the Silver Age Superman peaked. So again, I think it's the distillation of maybe the best parts, or
Best parts,
we like the most, or the things we identify with the character the most. And no, that's not an easy thing. But my thing is always, I'm very consistent. I say it all the time. I don't understand why we can't get that for everybody. How can you have Nightcrawler next to look like Nightcrawler walked off the page, and then everybody else is like, who is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get that. I do not understand it. I don't have anything against Anna Paquin, but that's a version of Rogue. That's not the Rogue.
That was Kitty Pryde with Rogue's powers.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what that was. I was like, That's Kitty Pryde's character. Kitty Pryde was the Robin to Wolverine's Batman through the entire, John Byrne, Chris Claremont run.
Claremont run, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then she eventually got replaced by Jubilee, who they literally dressed in Robin's costume.
Yes.
I mean, she's literally wearing a yellow coat, a red top, and they made the shorts blue instead of green. Big change. So,
Yeah, so I don't understand the varying degrees of fidelity that we get in medium translation. We saw those clips of Ms. Marvel's costume. That's Kamala Khan right off the page, man. You could not make that look more like her. And then I'm looking at this other stuff, some other translations. I'm like, wait, what? I don't get it.
I like to hope that the entire genre of comic book movies is slowly learning a lesson. That we're trending toward a perfection of the skill of bringing the essence of these characters to the screen. And you can only see that it's happening. It's not always consistent, like David's saying, but fortunately, I believe we're seeing it more often. I see that in the productions moving forward, that we'll start seeing that more often. Like you're saying, that they're allowed more freedoms so that we can pull more from the comics and still keep the essences of those characters in the productions. And it's only going to be advantageous to the fans. They won't see it as a detriment anymore.
I think a lot of movie creators in particular, but comics creators as well, get assigned to a famous character like Batman, for example. And they think, well, this is my chance to put my spin on Batman. And in the process, they lose what has kept Batman's fandom for decades. It's like, I think one reason the Wonder Woman movie was so successful is that Patty Jenkins took the things fans have loved about Wonder Woman for years, and she celebrated those things.
Yes.
And so she managed to put her spin on the character without changing the character to something a lot of her fans would recognize. And I think that a lot of creators who do these movies, I'm not going to give you the Batman you grew up with. I'm going to give you my Batman.
Right.
My Daredevil. And the reason the Potter movies were so true to the books is that Rowling had approval over absolutely everything. And
I think that's why the Marvel movies work, is because someone at Marvel has a hold on it. It's not like when they sold it off to Fox and really had no say whatsoever. They actually have some say in it. So I think that helps.
I was going to bring up a question for everybody. I know the moment whenever I feel like we went from X-Men wearing black leather to Polka Dot Man gets to be Polka Dot Man. And for me, we have to jump to a different red suited hero. The first time I was watching TV and watched the Flash and the Reverse Flash go at each other on the Flash TV show, I was like, I don't know what just happened, but that was the quantum leap. Because who would have ever dreamed you would see the Flash and the Reverse Flash on a live action 8:00 p.m. primetime television show and watch them running after each other in a football stadium? I'm like, something just happened and it was wonderful.
And
Does anybody have another
give them
moment?
credit. Give them credit, because that costume shouldn't work. But it does.
Well, certain the Underoos version didn't work. The pajamas version didn't work. No, but the red fire suit, that works.
Yeah.
So
let
me say this before we jump to the Daredevil.
Yeah, sorry to jump red suits.
No, that's okay. That's all right.
Okay.
But
Nancy, I have to admit that I'm doing everything I can not to absolutely freak out, because I don't agree with what you said about Wonder Woman at all. That movie makes me so mad, I can't watch it.
the original Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
not 84.
The first one with Patty Jenkins. Oh my God, that is not Diana. That hurts me to watch. I only watched that movie one time. Can't stand it.
We'll come back sometime and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
She's working on another one and we can do a Wonder Woman thing.
Yeah, I get it. No, you talking. I'm like, what? But anyway, with Daredevil, what I like the most about what happened again with Ben Affleck's movie is, again, if he were real, it would look like that. You'd have to sleep in a sleep deprivation chamber if your senses are turned up to 11 all the time. With the radar sensor, with using sonar using the waves coming back at you. And then he had a weakness of overly loud sounds. So like when we hear a jackhammer or traffic, we do that. But Matt couldn't function. His whole thing was, I love that. And the way that movie went off the rails to me was because they were not consistent about his powers or the tone. If it's going to be funny or light, let it be funny or light. If it's going to be dark and gritty, let it be that. But Bullseye felt kind of out of place to me. Like he was trying to be a version of the Joker. And I'm like, no, be Bullseye. You don't have to try to be the Joker. And then introducing Elektra and killing her all in the same thing. That was way too fast.
Yeah.
And Jennifer Garner is not Elektra.
Yeah, before we get into the movie though, let's do characters. And then we'll move into that. And David, I know you have to go, so I'm going to give you first shot at this. So
okay.
Get into it for sure. But of Daredevil's supporting characters, which do you think are more important to the character's core, to his core story? And David, you should start us off on this.
Okay. They did a right thing with Karen Page and Foggy. When you write well, you write at least 4 corner opposition. You write each one of the character supporting cast going through what the character goes through, except from their point of view. So Foggy always represents, I will say, a different set of morals to counter with whatever Matt might be dealing with when he's on the stand and he hears that somebody's lying. That triggers something inside of Matt, and Foggy doesn't have that. So he sees it differently. With Karen was always, at least in the beginning, the kind of character where she's the behind the scenes character that sees everything but don't say nothing. So those are all different reflections of Matt. So I think that core, and then with his father being the motivator character, his father saying, I would rather give my life for what's right than throw a fight and have to live with that shame. That's what struck, see, that's the Bruce Wayne moment. When Matt realized my father would rather die than compromise what he knew to be right. He could have thrown the fight, he could have lived, we could have been rich. And my father said no. See, so each one of those plays into a part of who Matt is. So I don't know if I can pick one above them all. I think his dad, Karen, and Foggy are his 4 corners. And I think they're all just as important because they're all bouncing through the same thing he goes through. They just respond differently.
Okay, well, we are coming up on 7:35 Eastern. So do you want to add anything else before you leave us?
Anything about that or anything about what I'm doing?
Well, anything about Daredevil, and then tell people where they can find information about you and your work.
Okay, what I want to add about Daredevil is, I just tweeted about it actually. I really do hope they make both the show canon and use that as a springboard, because I think they should bring all of the Netflix people, and I mean everybody, plus Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., everybody into the entire universe. So I'm really hoping we see Charlie Cox again, but I'm hoping his power special effects are more expanded or more focused on like Ben Affleck's Daredevil. That's my hope about the character. For me, you can find all of my work at davidtaylor2.net. That's 2, the number 2. All my novels, my comic books, my coloring books. What I'm working on now is I'm working on an interlude between my first novel and my second novel. My first novel is Soldier, Serpents, and Sin, A Clash of Lightning and Thunder. My second novel is Provoke the Past. In between, there's an interlude called Too Many Wings. So that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm going to drop this year. And it talks about what happens in the aftermath of Lucifer's first wave of rebellion. What would heaven look like after the devil tears it up and stages a coup? What would Michael and Raphael and Gabriel and Uriel, what would they say? What do we do when our brother is turned against us? And now every place we look is a war zone. So that's what I'm working on now. So that hopefully will be out this year.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This was awesome. But yeah, you guys are awesome. You guys know that. I love you guys. So we talk on Twitter all the time. You guys are awesome. So I definitely want to come back, especially if we're going to talk about Wonder Woman, because I got a lot to say about that.
I promise you we will.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Take it easy.
See you later.
Okay, so core characters. Who do you think among Daredevil's characters is a core supporting character? Dan, you want to start?
I've got to go with Kingpin. It's it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good idea to have your hero and your villain be the opposite of each other in as many ways as possible. Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Luke is a little guy who usually dresses in white. Vader is enormous and dressed in black. Batman and the Joker. Then you've got the switch. You've got the good guy dressed scary and the bad guy dressed like a clown. They're opposites. And to me, Daredevil and the Kingpin have basically always been a really good set of opposites. Daredevil is dressed like a demon. He's not an enormous guy, and he's incredibly fast and keeps in the shadows. Whereas Wilson Fisk looks like the personification of late stage capitalism. He's literally like a fat cat dressed all in white, obviously wealthy, huge man of influence, lives his life in the public eye. And I think they play off each other really well.
Okay, anybody else?
I think one of the we talked about bringing the Kingpin over from Spider-Man. I think another great supporting character that came over from the Spider-Man books is Ben Urich. I think Ben adds a bit of conscious to Daredevil, because he knows that Matt is Daredevil, and he can say things to Matt that, like, whereas Foggy keeps Matt grounded because Foggy believes in the law, and Foggy is the thing that keeps Matt from taking that step over that line to becoming the Punisher.
I thought Andy Curtis Hall was really good as Ben Urich in the TV show, even though it's not that slant on the characters. It's not that relationship. But I thought he did a really good job. And it was interesting that he was more Karen's supporting character than Matt's.
And because in the books, I mean, Ben Urich has especially with like being stalked by, once he learns the truth and being stalked and threatened by Elektra and Bullseye and all that. I mean, Ben goes through a lot. The Born Again series is a great character arc for him, where they try to kill his wife and to shut him up, and what it really explores him as the reporter. How important is it to protect his source and things like that? And we get a lot of good stuff out of Ben, I think.
Anybody else?
I have to agree what David said. The four corners of Matt's core are represented by the four supporting characters. His father initially, his Foggy keeps him focused on the legal aspect of what he does. Karen reminds him of what he's fighting for. She is the personification of the hardships that people in Hell's Kitchen go through. And I have to add that Wilson Fisk is the personification of everything outside of Hell's Kitchen that Matt is fighting against. So it puts it there's a perfect balance between all three of them. I mean, all five of them actually, that allows that really builds the entire character of Daredevil as a whole unit. Each one plays off of each other. They make Matt who he is. You couldn't, in my opinion, you could not have the Daredevil character that we are familiar with without any one of them not being there.
I like too how when they went in and explored the origins and all and added Elektra to his backstory, Elektra becomes the personification of what he could be if he was not trying to live up to what his father wanted. If he just would embrace it, he could go out and do what she does.
Yeah.
I would add to that. I think it's going to be clear that I'm a huge fan of the Frank Miller run. And I think what was so genius about that is when he meets Elektra, when he deals with Frank Castle, when he deals with Bullseye, these are all people who are not just his villains, but exactly what y'all just said, these are all people that he could be if he chose to be, but he doesn't kill people, so he's not Bullseye, and he doesn't go full avenging, so he's not Frank, and he's not an assassin, so he's not an Elektra. And then eventually, I believe he became the mayor, did he not, later in the run? And so, and that's almost him being Kingpin, but not doing it for bad, doing it his way. And so all of his villains are like, almost like the, I can do what you do, I just don't. And so but I agree with also the Foggy Karen father. They're more like the people that build him up, and the other ones are who he chooses not to be.
I think too with Karen, with what happens to Karen later, she becomes, you know, more of the this is what I'm fighting for, because he really goes through this I failed Karen stage.
Yeah.
And because of what happened to her, and there's a redemption arc with her, because, you know, when she's out of the book for years, and when she comes back, you know, Frank Miller, she's in the Born Again run, she's really messed up. She actually sells his secret identity to someone that gets back to the Kingpin, etc. And then, but there's still a redemption arc of that she is able to come back from that, and then of course later gets killed. But I think, you know, there's a big part of him that feels like he failed her, which made him work really harder to help not only her come back, but that's in the run where they start running the free legal clinic. They're taking care of all these kids, these street kids. And so, yeah, I think she really, through different stages, I think signifies a different thing in his life.
I was very sad when they really killed Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Smith, love you to death, but man, that hurt.
Yeah.
You know, the last page of the last issue of the run immediately before the current one that ended the regular run, and then there was a mini series that kicked off the current one, is Matt's been in an accident. All the injuries that he's had over all the years have caught up with him, and he's dying. And the last page of the issue, and so if you haven't read it and you want to read it, put your hands in your ears and go la 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 for about 30 seconds, is Karen Page close up her face saying something like, Matt, don't worry, you did everything you could. And it's like, holy cow. I mean, if you didn't know there was going to be another run of Daredevil, it would be kind of like, wow.
Yeah.
So anybody else want to say anything about supporting characters or rogues gallery or anything like that before we move on?
Just quickly, the Daredevil is also where I first met the Black Widow. So I think most of my certainly my early love for the character came from seeing her when she showed up during fighting ninjas and all that. So
That's 188.
That was the first issue I ever bought. It was the one with her on the cover, like he's in the web and she's
Big black cover with the web. That's a beautiful cover.
That was my introduction to both of those characters. So
that's a beautiful cover. Introduction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, almost like seeing Jean Grey get killed. Be your introduction to you.
Your introduction.
Yeah.
Especially, and you have no idea who she is, but.
And the fact they can make you care enough about Elektra or Jean Grey in the space of one issue that when you get to the end, it still punches you in the gut. I mean, what about the people that have been reading it for years? They must have been like, what just happened? Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, let's move on then to the movie and TV adaptations, which we've talked about a little bit already. But what are the things that strike you as the best about the Daredevil movie or the TV shows? Dan, you want to start?
Well, it's not really in line with the way the character fights in the comics, but I did really appreciate the way Charlie Cox fights in the Netflix series. And it's because it seemed like it really cost him a lot. You know, I was just watching Doctor Strange this afternoon, the movie, and he takes so many really hard shots to the face and just shrugs them off. Now, I love the movie. I know he's a sorcerer, but you know, it didn't even mark him. Whereas in the Netflix series, Charlie Cox just gets pummeled, just constantly. You know, Rosario Dawson finds him literally in a dumpster at one point. He's so broken. And I really like that, you know, a character that has always been street level. The more realistic aspects of the Marvel universe taking that kind of damage in a more or less realistic way.
And he breathes heavy. That's one of the things I noticed too in those fights. He's over there going, you know,
Yeah, he's exhausted.
He needs a second to lean against the wall.
Mhm.
And I thought that was great. And I, you know, from a filmmaking standpoint, they do it at least once in each season. There's a big hallway
fight.
battle. In season 3, there's like an 11-minute single take, or it looks like a single take of
It
him
was
trying
a
to,
yeah,
of him trying to get out of the, of him trying to get out of the prison. And you know, I give big ups to them for doing it, because you can see he goes out of the frame, the stunt man takes the flip, he pops up. I mean, and the way they do it's just fantastic. So there's a lot of that for, like you said, a low budget production, that they do get some good fight material out of it. And I thought the casting was excellent. Certainly, I think, you know, Foggy, I thought Foggy was perfect. Certainly Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin was excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely perfect.
And I kind of think Deborah Ann Wall ought to be in everything.
yeah. She was,
Yeah.
Personal preference.
Well, I really like the take that the TV series had on Karen Page.
Yeah.
She's a much more active character, a much more assertive character.
Agreed.
She's kind of a mix of a little bit of Karen from the early comics when she was just the girl in the office, but then they put some of that stuff that come later where she's helping him run the office. So yeah, they merged a lot of that together very well, I thought. And having her do things on her own, because, you know, in the 60s, she was the damsel that had to be rescued a lot.
Yeah.
The fact that she does a lot in this book, like in this show, like where she kills Wesley, you know, that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
As far as the movie, I have this long theory about why comic books make great movies, except for they don't. And the reason why is the number one thing comic books have going for them is that you know these characters for a long time, so that when Green Goblin's through Gwen Stacy off a bridge, or when you kill Elektra, or when you know, Superman dies, you've known these characters for so long that there's so much emotion built up behind them. And somebody, I forget who it was, said before, but I mean, in the Daredevil movie, you have Daredevil's origin, Elektra's origin, Bullseye's origin, Kingpin's origin. I mean, it was bad enough in Batman 2 when you had to get the Penguin and Catwoman's origin, but I mean, throw in another one. I'm like, there's not enough time. One of the things that makes these Elektra things so tragic is that that's Matt's college girlfriend. It's the girlfriend back home who suddenly showed back up and said, "Oh, I'm a ninja assassin now, and I'm your arch enemy." And he's like, "But I loved her, but now how do I feel about her?" And their big thing, if you have them meet on the park and have their meet cute on the balance beam, and then she dies 2 days later, you're kind of like, it's sad, but he literally just met her, and he can't care that he can't care that much. I mean, he does, but it's not the same as the person you loved when you were 20, who's now back in your life, killing all your friends, but also kind of flirting with you, and you don't know how you feel about that. And then she gets stabbed with her own sai. That's the thing. And that's what you can't do in a 2-hour movie, which is why I think the Daredevil show works so good, because by the end of the first season, you've got enough time for Matt and Wilson to really dislike each other pretty significantly.
Character development. It's important.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think, you know, a lot of times the people making these, you know, they're making them with things like that. Because, oh, we're going to kill Elektra, well, because the fans will know. But more people watch these movies than have read the books.
Yeah.
And so those things are not evident to those viewers who are going like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
And the other thing is, if you tell me Elektra trained under Stick and then was with the Hand for 10 years, and now she can go toe to toe with Matt, I believe it. If you tell me I took martial arts like in college and I can go toe to toe to Daredevil, then I'm kind of like,
Nah.
really?
Yeah.
I was like, that's cute and everything. And it's not a male female thing. It's just simply Matt has spent the last 5 to 10 years doing nothing but beat up street thugs. And she took martial arts, I think was the thing. I was like, I don't think she can take Matt. I'm sorry.
But she had the montage. Come on. She had the
You're the
montage.
best around from Karate Kid. And she did the montage. You're the best around.
Mike, did you
Did have a
want to
montage.
Did you want to weigh in on the movies and the TV?
Who's that?
Mike.
I had to go back and watch the director's cut of the movie. Everyone kept saying, because I watched the first one and I thought, man, this had some potential, but you could definitely see where the edits took huge chunks out of the movie. Go back and watch the director's cut and it's like, it makes sense. Okay. I mean, still, yeah. I mean, the movie is definitely, you can definitely tell when the movie was made. You can definitely tell the mindset of the producers back then when they made that movie. Daredevil was kind of hanging out. Daredevil as a property was kind of hanging out by itself. You know, it didn't have the support that it would have today with all the MCU and everything else. It's out there by itself, and they were doing the best they could, and this is what they produced. And bless them for it. But it had problems, like you said. There was definitely too many ingredients in the soup. You know,
I also think too at the time, if I'm remembering it correctly, you know, because comics were not as, you know, the comic book movies were Batman and Superman,
mm-hmm.
you know, and Daredevil is very Batman-ish if you're looking at it from way over there.
And that's what the intention was, I think, to make it very Batman-ish. To grab people immediately, you know, because they didn't have a better way of presenting Daredevil as to a guy in red that's like Batman. You know, you could almost imagine the board meeting just trying to pitch this, saying, "Hey, oh yeah, he's a guy in red like Batman."
Yeah, it's because, like I said, there's a lot of times too, you know, the movies are dictate. I mean, what they can do. That's just like, well, you know, not to get too far, of course, but like this 4-hour Justice League that they put on HBO. People are going, well, that's what, if that had been in the theater, but Warner Brothers was not going to put a 4-hour movie.
No, they weren't
in the theater because that's losing money for them.
Yeah.
So, you know, in you know, and those, you know, as we have all like worked with publishers and things like that, we know that sometimes there's things you want to do, you just can't. You know.
What?
Right? Oh, I'm sorry. DC gave you free reign with everything. I forgot. You're the one. You're the one.
You know, I really did like Ben Affleck's portrayal of Matt. That was probably my favorite thing in the movie. And Michael Clark Duncan, I think, was the Kingpin. And I thought he did a really good job too. And those were the ones to me that carried that movie because, as Darin pointed out, there were too many origins dropped in and interrupted the flow of the main story. But the tension between Matt and the Kingpin, best I remember, was a pretty constant thing through the movie.
Yeah. And at least they had that string. At least they had that string throughout the movie. There was definitely animosity between those two characters. And at least that piece of it was something that you could consistently hold on to as you walk through the movie.
How much harder would it have been, though, to have made Elektra be his college girlfriend and have her have been like some version of the actual Elektra to make her an actual formidable foe? I mean, how much harder would that have been than the meet cute we got?
Honestly, I wouldn't.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Honestly, I wouldn't even have introduced Elektra in this movie at all.
Daredevil 2.
Yes. Honestly.
Right, but that's probably one of those things, though. They probably had no choice.
Yeah.
That was probably
They wanted the death of Elektra. What is the most popular Daredevil story of all time? Daredevil 181. Make that into a movie, but we can't because Elektra's not been introduced. Don't care. It's the same reason we got Legolas in The Hobbit. What did everybody like in Lord of the Rings? Chased by orcs. Well, they weren't chased by orcs in The Hobbit. Do it anyway. What else did they like? Legolas. Stick Legolas in that movie. Legolas isn't in The Hobbit. We don't care.
We don't care. He's in there.
He's in there. What else did they like? That's exactly it's
Yeah.
it's Legolas and the Hobbit. That's
Yeah.
right
Yeah,
there.
that's why Venom's in Spider-Man, the third Spider-Man from the original trilogy.
Yeah.
It's like that's too many villains. No,
Let's
he's
put him in
popular.
there.
Put him in there.
Put them in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we finally got an Elektra movie, and it just wasn't. I don't know who that character was, but she was
Garbage.
Elektra from the comics. But actually, another thing I really like about the TV series is I think Scott Glenn is one of our American underrated actors. And I thought he did a really good job as Stick. And the changing dynamic between Stick and Matt and Elektra was really interesting. And I've just watched 1.5 episodes of season 3. That's how far I am into the show. And Stick has a knack of turning up when you don't expect it. So that dynamic really is interesting to me. And I like the way Matt comes in. I mean, I come in, I drop my keys, I drop my purse, I turn on the light. Matt comes in, he drops his keys, he sets his cane, and he doesn't turn on the light. And that's just that. Well, of course he doesn't turn on the light. It doesn't make any difference to him.
Right.
The light is on. But every time he comes in and doesn't turn on the light, that's a reminder that to Matt, what difference does it make?
Well, this and that, yeah. The little things in the TV show, they nailed it. They really did. And you get the feel through the whole first season. You really get the feel of Daredevil year 1. You know, it was a brutal time for him as a character, and that's what I loved about it too.
Well, I went back and watched on Dragon Con TV's website. One of the highlights they have is they called it a panel, but it was really Charlie Cox and a guy to MC in 2016. And one of the people brought up the scene in the prison where the Kingpin's lawyer hands Matt a Braille release he has to sign, and it's upside down. And Matt runs his fingers over it and just turns it upside down and keeps going. And so I was watching for that when we got to it. It really was a very nice little bit of business. And Charlie Cox said, well, he can't read Braille, but he learned what people do as they read Braille. And that when the guy handed it to him, he realized it was upside down. The impression I got was it wasn't intentional that this would be a bit of business for Matt. That's just the way it worked out, which was really nice, I thought. One thing I want to get to before we wrap up is if you were recommending a starting point on Daredevil on the comic book for somebody, what would you recommend? Mike, you want to start?
Ooh. I mean, there's probably I would go with I'd go with the Frank Miller run. If I had to say, yeah, I would definitely go with Frank Miller run, because you can go backwards and do a historical read of Daredevil before then. But if you're going to get the essence of it, I have to say, for familiarity's sake, you definitely have to start with the Frank Miller run. You know, you'll understand a lot of what Daredevil is as a character starting at that point.
Anybody else?
I think that is the starting point.
And I would say, I mean, and the Frank Miller run is kind of daunting. It's multiple books.
Yes.
I would say to narrow it down, I would recommend Man Without Fear.
Yeah.
Which is one trade. You can get the whole story, which was a movie pitch actually that Frank Miller wrote that a lot of ends up in the Netflix show.
That was John Romita Jr., right?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yes.
That was
beautiful book. And so that's a good one. It's like it's a lot like season 1. It's like he's not in a costume till the last page, you know. It's year 1. And then I would say Born Again is an excellent standalone. You don't have to know anything to get there. That is a good starting point.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I would read 157 through 191, 200, and then I would read 227 through 233. That is the Frank Miller run. I would start with 157, which is the issue before the Frank Miller run, because it's a 2-parter with the Night Stalker, and you read the one before, and then you can watch what happens when Frank Miller takes over. And then you can sort of cherry pick a little bit, but I think you want to read all the Kingpin, Bullseye, and Elektra stuff, because what happens in the Born Again 7 issues means a lot more if you've already watched Matt and Kingpin basically do everything they can to kill each other through the entire Frank Miller run.
Yeah.
That's what I would recommend if someone can do it. If you can get on like the Marvel Online, and I would probably start at 157 and read straight through until Matt's hugging a tombstone and skip ahead to 227.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
It was a bit of a magical time.
It was
that era of Marvel, because this was the era where we got several artists who got to write for the first time because they were working on books that were about to be canceled. Walt Simonson on Thor, Frank Miller on Daredevil, John Byrne on the Fantastic Four, where they let these guys, well, you know what, we're going to cancel the book anyway, just do whatever you want. And they turned these books around and made them big hits. And Frank Miller brought, because he was just the artist for a good, at least several issues. And this was when Daredevil was coming out every other month. It was not a big seller. It was, and so they're basically like, yeah, you can do whatever you want to, we'll pay you to do a few issues until we kill it. And, suddenly it goes from that to now we're doing it movies and TV shows.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, did you want to weigh in on that?
Not really. I have to make the observation. I can't quote issues by stories by issue numbers. I can't quote anything.
No, honestly, I can't either, bro.
I can't quote my own comics by issue number.
I'm sorry. When it's like classic era X, I can't do that with all comics. When it's classic era X-Men and Daredevil, for some reason, those numbers just stick in my head. Like literally from like X-Men 94 through about 170. If you tell me an issue number, I can tell you what's on the cover. And I don't know why, but it was like a very formative couple of years when I was a kid. And those images are just in my head. I can tell you what's on the cover. I can tell you what happened in the issue. Later on, like in the 90s, whenever there are 4 million comic books coming out every month, not so much. Whenever there was 1 X-Men and 1 Daredevil and 2 Batman per month, it was pretty easy to do that. When there were 20 X-Men per month, not so much. So
and now they start over with new number ones every few years. So it gets
number 1, number 2, brand new number 1. There was a number 1 3 months ago.
Well, just to be different, I'll put in a plug for the current run and the miniseries before it that was called No Fear. It's a 5-issue miniseries, and it introduced it would be a good introduction because it kind of walks Matt through the traumas of his past that he has to confront in order to go back to being Daredevil again. And I really love this run. Before this run, I would have probably said the Miller run, especially toward the end, was my favorite, because toward the end of that run, they broke Matt down completely. They took everything away from him. And I still remember this panel of Matt lying on a bed. I can't remember whether it was a cheap motel or a homeless shelter, freezing in this cold room. And then he gets up from that and he resolves to go and confront the Kingpin. And the last line, I think, of the issue was, "A man without hope is a man without fear." And I still remember that all these years later. But since everybody else said the Miller run, I'm going to say the current run, just to be different and get in a plug for it. So
I'll give you one more then. I'll give you the Mark Waid, Chris Samney run is an excellent read. It's a lot more lighthearted than, the Miller run is pretty dark and very very gloomy-ish. But that run kind of takes him back to his swashbuckling days a bit, where he's a lot more lighthearted.
I would also give the original run with John Romita Jr. drawing with Typhoid Mary is really, really good too.
So we've given people a lot to choose from. Before we wrap up, is there anything anybody would like to add about Daredevil? This is your shot.
He is an integral part of the Marvel universe. You're definitely not going to get the full spectrum of the universe itself without touching on Daredevil's contribution to it.
And if the rumors are to be believed, I'm excited to see him in the new Spider-Man movie.
That movie looks to be awesome. Can't wait.
Well, supposedly Charlie Cox's forearms have been seen in the shot, so we'll see. Dan, did you want to add anything?
Nope.
All righty then. Then we'll start with you, and we'll go around, and please tell everybody where they can find you and what you're working on now that you would like people to know about. So, Dan?
You can find me at danjolley.com, and that's DANJOLLEY. Everybody always leaves out the E for, an easy to see reason. Go there. If you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free short story that is available nowhere else. And what I've got coming up on October 15th, my first ever fantasy novel comes out from Falstaff Books.
Woo!
It's a hybrid fantasy detective story called The Rune Master Homicide. And I'm really looking forward to seeing it out in the world.
Okay.
Us too.
Yep.
All right.
Mike?
Well, I can be, our website is www.themarveluniverseonline.com. Go there, check it all out. It's like I said, it's a dynamic pitch project. You will have questions, and I am always on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to answer those questions. So.
All right, Bobby?
BobbyNash.com is my website. There's links to everything there. I'm author Bobby Nash on Facebook, at Bobby Nash on Twitter, and Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram.
Okay. Darin?
I'm DarinKennedy.com. That's where my website is. I'm on Facebook at Darin Kennedy. Actually, it's the chessboard if you want to join my group. And then I'm on Instagram at Darin Kennedy Author, as well as on Twitter at Darin Kennedy Author. And on Instagram, you'll see all the pretty pictures I take of flowers and other things in nature, because that's what I mainly want to put out into the universe. And I write this stuff.
And I'm Nancy Northcott. You can find me at nancynorthcott.com or on Twitter, where I spend far more time than is good for me. And I am at Nancy Northcott. And my latest release is historical fantasy set during the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the 100 days between Napoleon's escape from Elba and the Battle of Waterloo, from Falstaff Books. And I'd like to thank everyone on the panel, including David, who had to leave early, for joining us for this discussion. And thanks to everybody who watched it.
All right.